A recommendation for how to regulate racially biased software by Evan Rose. Introduction. What types of softwares have been found to be racially biased? My paper primarily focused on artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies, and what those comprise of are your Alexas, your Google Homes, your facial recognition software, and where a lot of my data came from was my risk assessment algorithms. Those are machine learning algorithms which take a criminal's record, as long as their age, race, living situation, and a bunch of other data related to them, and gives them a risk score for how risky it is for them to repeat an offense. These were categorized versus white and black defendants through a study done by ProPublica. And what it's shown is there is a clear separation of lower risk scores for white individuals and more of a uniform and random distribution for black individuals. And as that study was done, it was shown that these conclusions in the data were a result of racial bias. And that led me to the question, well, how do we regulate these technologies? How do we ensure that racial bias isn't there? Well, it led me to regulation. We have to test them. We have to analyze the data. We have to study the impacts on certain demographics. And that can be done in two ways, internally and externally. External, as it sounds, is it's external organizations outside of the company doing the testing to ensure that their product is accurate and safe to use. Internal is the reverse, where the companies and their employees do the testing and ensure that it's safe to use. External regulation continued. It's testing done by outside organizations. It prioritizes public safety, and it protects intersectionality groups, importantly, those that are, I guess, more at risk to the bias of these algorithms. Benefits: it's unbiased, it's done systematically. Negatives: sensitive information of these products, and maybe some amount of financial burden could be placed on companies that have to call these outside organizations to help them. So that, there's some hoops to jump through there. Why it's needed. The Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act of 2015, that was an act that calls for the mandated usage of these risk assessment algorithms, which in essence would put more individuals at risk to this racial bias and negatively impact a lot more lives. So it's needed. We need to regulate nonetheless. Whether external regulation is the right answer or not is more up for interpretation. How it can be implemented. There's regulatory sandbox, which is basically a structured way of testing. You can also update laws. You can update laws in the digital practice realm and try to protect more users from biased algorithms. And we didn't really know these things existed. We have to update and continue to update our practices and as it deems fit. Internal regulation. What is it? Well, it's testing and regulation done by the company and its employees. It emphasizes the ethical integrity of their product. That's an important thing put forth by ACM Code of Ethics. Code of Ethics are followed by nearly every industry, no matter where you are, and that was one of them. Benefits: it protects sensitive information and it emphasizes diversity within the company. Negatives: somewhat unstructured, and that depends on the ethical integrity of the producer. If you have a producer that doesn't care about the rights and needs of its consumers, then for one, that's a bad producer, and two, you can't really do much about it. You have to depend on them, which is a downside to it. Why it's needed. There's a lack of protection for target groups, especially with the Code of Ethics that's currently put forth. I think it does a very poor job at protecting these intersectionality groups that are at risk to bias, and I think it needs updating. Implicit racial bias exists everywhere. We're at a time right now in America where we've seen systematic racism. Even Joe Biden, our president, has said that, it exists and we need to fix it. It's addressed through consequences in people and details, meaning you understand how people are impacted, and you also have to look at the data. You have to see both demographics versus math. It's everywhere bias exists. How it can be implemented. Diversity and inclusion training, richly detailed data sets, algorithm accuracy testing. There's a bunch of ways it can be done. What I came to conclude was, there is racial bias and that needs to be addressed. And the best way I found that was internal regulation. I thought it was practical and simple. I thought it protect the fiscal integrity of the companies without sacrificing their data. What else was there? It was effective. It's contextually aware of the demographics, and it provides opportunity and, I would say, greater structure at eliminating that bias. It emphasizes diversity and inclusion. As we see here, companies with above average diversity also have higher innovation revenues. They make more money on average. Racial bias has and will continue to be a problem that society endures. But by taking these steps, we can create an environment supportive of racial inclusivity. We can create a future worth living towards, but we have to regulate and address these technologies as we see fit.